Welcome, fellow explorers of the unseen, to the All Sorts podcast.
Hello.
Imagine stepping into a gallery where the canvases are, sun-baked cliffs, and the stories are whispered in ochre and charcoal across millennia.
Incredible imagery.
Picture hands, long turned to dust, carefully grinding these vibrant minerals to leave their mark. A legacy of color, clothing, form, etched right onto the earth.
It's quite profound when you think about it like that.
Absolutely. And if this journey into ancient expression sparks your curiosity, then please join our community. Like, share, subscribe to the All Sorts podcast on YouTube.
Definitely. It's the best way to catch all our deep dives, including the archive.
And for that ongoing conversation, find us on X, Instagram, and Threads. We love hearing from you.
So, today's deep dive, we are immersing ourselves in the captivating world of colors, attire, and figures in rock art.
Yeah, this is a fascinating one.
We'll be drawing insights from research spanning continents. We're talking the Atacama Desert, Australia.
The Guiana and Wangina traditions there.
Exactly. And Algeria to Sicilian Ager, Botswana's Sodilo Hills, Zimbabwe.
Wow, quite the geographic spread.
And we'll even touch on some modern interpretations from online discussions, which could be quite revealing in their own way.
Okay, so our mission today. Let's try to understand how the pigments these artists created, the details of dress they depicted, and the actual forms of the beings they represented. How all that can shed light on their beliefs, their societies, their worldviews.
Makes sense. Where should we start? Color seems like a good entry point.
Agreed. Let's unpack the language of color. The Atacama Desert in northern Chile, our sources say this is a fantastic place to begin.
Right. The research identifies a pretty consistent palette there. Red, yellow, green, black, and white. And this was used over a really long time span.
Yeah, something like 2000 BCE all the way to 1550 CE.
And what's truly remarkable is the knowledge implied behind just having those colors available.
Absolutely. These weren't just random finds. The sources mention reds often came from iron oxides, hematite, basically rust, right?
Exactly. Yellows from minerals like goethite or jarosite. Black, usually charcoal.
Okay.
And white, often aluminosilicates or maybe titanium oxides.
And then you get the trickier ones, like greens and blues. The research suggests they might have come from carefully mixing copper compounds, things like clinoatacamite, bandylite, mixing them with other minerals.
Imagine the trial and error. The experimentation needed to get those specific shades.
It wasn't just grabbing colored dirt. It implies a real understanding of mineralogy.
Yeah, knowing where to find these things, maybe through direct landscape knowledge, maybe even early trade networks.
And then the skill to actually process them, grinding them down maybe with special tools.
And mixing them with binders to make a workable paint. Choosing a color must have been a very deliberate act.
And red just keeps showing up in the Atacama art, doesn't it, across all those centuries?
It really does. And here's where it gets interesting. There's a correlation, the researchers noticed.
Okay.
Figures painted in just one color monochrome, they often lack details like clothing or, ornaments.
Right.
But when you get multiple colors on one figure polychrome, it almost always depicts humans with body paint or clothes or jewelry or holding objects.
So it's like color itself was used to emphasize those elements of identity, to make them visible.
That's exactly what the research suggests. That color was used to, quote, materialize elements of distinction. It links back to sociological ideas like Bourdieu's about how visible things, clothes, possessions communicate social difference.
So it wasn't just aesthetics, it was encoding information, status, maybe, group belonging.
Potentially. Maybe certain pigments were harder to get, rarer, so using them was a statement in itself.
Okay, now let's shift continents. What about the Guiana art in Western Australia? That stuff is incredibly old, right?
Yeah, potentially up to 12,000 years old, some estimates suggest. And the color profile there seems, different.
How so?
Mostly you see these deep purple reds, mulberry colors, or reds to yellow browns. Genuine multicolored figures are apparently quite rare, though some do retain traces of yellow and white paint.
And there's that wild theory about the color source, too, isn't there?
Oh yeah, the potential role of biology. Research suggests this symbiotic relationship between black fungi and red bacteria living on the rock surface.
Wow.
And these tiny organisms might have actually helped create or preserve the vibrancy of the red pigments over time.
So less about grinding minerals and more like a collaboration between the artist and the local ecosystem.
Kind of. It's a completely different dynamic compared to the Atacama preparation methods. Almost like the rock itself is part of the painting process.
That's mind-bending. Okay, what about other places? Sodilo Hills in Botswana.
There, the sources mention predominantly red finger-painted art, Lots of animals, humans, geometric shapes.
Finger painted. Okay.
But then later in time, you start seeing white finger-painted images, people, animals, and possibly even a wagon wheel.
Ah, a wagon wheel. That clearly signals a much later period. Contact with Europeans, presumably.
Exactly. It's a historical marker right there in the paint.
And Zimbabwe. What's the palette like there?
Pretty diverse, actually. Red, brown, yellow, orange, purple, white, black, all sourced from local minerals again.
Similar mineral base, then?
Seems so. And while most paintings are just one color, monochromatic, there are examples with two colors, or multiple colors.
Bichromatic, polychromatic.
Right. And sometimes that's used very deliberately, like to show the natural coat patterns on animals, which again shows that understanding of how color can be used for realism.
It's fascinating how color pops up everywhere, but with these regional variations, sometimes for status, sometimes realism, sometimes maybe tied to just what minerals were around.
Or specific cultural meanings we haven't fully deciphered yet.
Right. Okay, so from color, let's move on to what these figures are wearing. Attire. Ornamentation. That's another rich layer, isn't it?
Definitely. Back in the Atacama, there's the Confluencia style, dated between 2000 and 500 BCE. The anthropomorphs, the human-like figures in that style, are quite detailed. They show anatomy, clothing, even a sense of movement. Early glimpses into adornment.
And then in the Guian art, you get those distinct styles defined by what they're wearing, right? The tassel and sash figures.
Exactly. The tassel figures are easy to spot. Loads of tassels hanging from their arms, their waists, often shown with armbands, headdresses, bags, even boomerangs sometimes.
So much detail.
And the sash figures are similar, but they have this characteristic three-pointed sash, or maybe bags attached to their belts. Those details must have meant something specific.
Yeah, you don't draw that consistently without a reason.
And then later in the Guian sequence, you get the clothes peg figures.
Clothes peg. Why that name?
Well, they have a simpler, more static appearance, kind of like an old-fashioned clothes peg, but they're often shown with interesting material culture.
Like what?
Multi-barbed spears, spear throwers, woven bags. So even these simpler figures tell us about the technology of the time.
And the fact that these styles seem to follow each other suggests changes over time, maybe in fashion or tools or even group identity.
That's the interpretation, yeah. It points towards cultural evolution within that tradition.
Okay, let's swing back to the Atacama again, but later periods. Late, intermediate, late period. What do we see then?
We see tunics depicted. And importantly, they have specific patterns, triangles, diamonds. Also depictions of decorated camlets like llamas or alpacas.
Ah, patterns linking to other cultures.
Potentially, yes. Researchers see parallels between these motifs and designs found on Inca pottery and textiles.
Okay, so that helps date these paintings later and suggests connections with the Inca Empire as it expanded.
Precisely. And some tunics even show these circular or rectangular shapes on the upper part, maybe appliques or decorations.
Interesting. And there's that Aguada-style influence mentioned too at an Inca site called Incahuasi.
Right. Their figures have white bodies, but with red details on their faces. Headdresses, plumes, garment decorations, even ankle cuffs. Very specific use of color for adornment.
So it seems the clothing isn't always just everyday wear.
That's a really important insight from the Atacama research. The depicted dress might often refer to symbolic situations, rituals, or carry deeper meanings.
Like those simple skirts from the early archaic period maybe having a specific context.
Exactly. Or those intricate Inca designs called tecocopis. They weren't just patterns. They were geometric symbols on textiles that held cosmological significance, especially for rulers.
So clothing is a visual language, conveying roles, beliefs, not just keeping warm.
Precisely. It's performing identity.
Which leads us perfectly into the figures themselves, the beings depicted. How are they interpreted? It's interesting, one source noted that human figures often get less attention than animals in stylistic studies.
That's true. Maybe animals seem more useful for dating or understanding the environment initially. The human form, perhaps seen as more straightforward.
But maybe not so straightforward when you look closely. What about those combined animal-human figures, the rheanthropes?
Ah, yes. The classic interpretation for those across many regions has often been shamanism, figures representing shamans transforming or mythological beings bridging the human and spirit worlds.
Makes intuitive sense.
It does. But for example, in Zimbabwe, true therianthropes are apparently quite rare in the rock art, which challenges the idea that the shamanic explanation fits everywhere.
Right. Got to be careful not to overgeneralize. One size doesn't fit all.
Exactly. It reminds us to look at the local context.
So what other frameworks are useful? You mentioned embodiment earlier in relation to the Atacama research.
Yes, the embodiment framework. It's a compelling idea. It suggests that bodies, through their actions, their posture, how they're dressed, aren't just reflecting social reality, they're actively creating it, perpetuating identities.
Can you give an example?
Well, think about how depicting leaders in specific regalia, standing in a certain powerful pose, would reinforce their authority to anyone seeing that image. The image helps make the social role real.
Okay, I see. Like reinforcing social structures through art.
We might see a hint of this in Sotelo Hills, with those schematic human figures in the red paintings.
The ones identified by lines for gender.
Right. Men sometimes shown by intersecting lines forming a penis, women by lines suggesting breasts. Very simple but distinct. And sometimes they appear in scenes that look ceremonial.
So the body itself, even schematically, is key to identity and participation in these scenes.
It seems likely. In contrast, geometric motifs are apparently quite rare in Zimbabwean rock art.
Really? Mostly figures.
Mostly, yeah. Though there is one emblematic geometric motif called the formling.
Formling? What's that?
It's described as an arrangement of aligned ovals. One interpretation suggests it might represent a termite mound.
Huh. Interesting. So even abstract forms could be tied to the specific local environment or beliefs?
Definitely. Now, we should probably address some of the more unconventional interpretations out there. Yes.
The Tessalina and Adjur paintings in Algeria.
Those are the ones, the striking humanoid figures that look like they're wearing helmets or spacesuits.
Yeah, they've definitely fueled that whole ancient astronaut theory in popular culture.
They certainly have. And while, the images are intriguing, the mainstream scientific view is quite different.
Which is?
That these are likely humans depicted in specific ritual attire. Maybe elaborate masks or headdresses that look strange to our modern eyes. It's easy to project our own context onto ancient images.
Good point. Which brings us to that Reddit discussion about the Wangina art from Australia.
Right. That was fascinating. Some people online were interpreting these powerful figures as, well, extraterrestrials.
Spirits from Dreamtime, but framed as aliens. Connections to Uluru's shape, the Pleiades.
Yeah, it shows how these ancient images still capture the imagination and fuel modern myth-making, really.
But there were counter-arguments in that discussion too, weren't there? About distinguishing old art from new.
Yes, very important point raised there. It's crucial to know if you're looking at ancient rock art or a more contemporary painting done in an Aboriginal style. The specific image discussed on Reddit might well have been a more recent piece.
Which highlights that these traditions are often still alive, still evolving, and we need to be careful with dating and context.
Absolutely. Attribution is key.
Okay, let's circle back to the Gwion figures one last time. What really stands out about the figures themselves there?
The sheer dynamism. So many are human silhouettes, depicted in motion, running, hunting, maybe dancing. There's a real sense of energy.
You can almost feel the movement.
And while gender isn't usually explicit, the musculature is often clearly defined. And there's that newer understanding.
About them facing into the rock.
Yes. Which has led to reinterpreting features previously called paunches as actually being gluteal muscles, their backsides.
Yeah.
Which further emphasizes these active, dynamic postures.
Fascinating. Changes the whole feel of the figure.
It does. And you have those different styles, again, tassel, sash, the elegant action figures, the more static closed peg figures, each showing humans in slightly different ways with different gear, doing different things. It's a rich narrative tapestry.
Wow. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. From pigment preparation to symbolic clothing to interpreting ancient astronauts.
It's a huge topic.
So let's try to distill this. As we wrap up this deep dive, what are the main takeaways from looking at color, attire, and figures in rock art?
Well, first, color wasn't just decoration, it was deliberate. Used to convey information, social distinctions, bring figures to life, maybe even reflecting interactions with the environment, like with those Gwion microbes.
Right, color had meaning.
Second, attire and ornamentation are clearly powerful symbolic systems. They communicate cultural practices, social roles, probably spiritual beliefs, not just functional items.
Loathing as language again.
Exactly. And third, the figures themselves, human, animal, geometric, the reentropic, and how we interpret them. They offer these glimpses into everything from daily life and rituals to mythology. And yes, sometimes they spark some pretty wild modern theories too.
It really is incredible how these images on rock can offer such a profound window Maybe sometimes a bit murky, enigmatic, but still a window into the minds and worlds of ancient people.
Yeah, the details matter. The color choice, the specific clothing item, the posture of a figure.
Hmm.
These weren't just random artistic choices. They were likely packed with meaning about identity, spirituality, how humans saw themselves in their world.
Which leads to a really interesting question for you, our listener, to ponder.
Hmm.
Considering rock art is found all over the world and spans such vast stretches of time, what fundamental aspects of the human experience do you think these ancient images still communicate today, regardless of the specific culture or time period?
That's a great question. What's the universal language speaking across the millennia?
Something to think about. And remember, your journey into these deep streams of knowledge doesn't have to stop here.
Keep exploring.
Become a true luminary of insight, like this deep dive. Share it with others who might be curious.
And subscribe. Hit that subscribe button for the All Sorts podcast on YouTube so you don't miss our future explorations.
Plus, there's a whole landscape of past deep dives already crafted, waiting for you in our archive. Lots to discover.
And finally, join the conversation. Follow the All Sorts podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads. Become part of our constellation of curious minds.
Where ideas spark and knowledge illuminates. Until our next exploration into the extraordinary,
Like asking questions.
keep those inquisitive fires burning.